questions along the way. And then at the very end, maybe 5 minutes, we'll be available to answer questions. When we run out of time, we'll stay after if you have private questions. Okay, so deep-rooted stuff. If you do that, we're okay. I'm a school counselor, 33 years, Sweetwater District, Nancy Park, 17 years, school psychologist, 10 years. So go ahead, everybody. Nancy, you're on.
You're on mute, Nancy.
There you go.
There you go.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So our presentation today is on the model minority myth. The first time I heard model minority was in college. That was the first time I even heard about Asians being the model minority. And I'm so glad they added the word myth now to the phrase, and that's what we're going to talk about, why it's a myth. So in the chat, if you can first just respond to the question, what does society expect of Asian American and Pacific Islanders? What are society's expectations that are placed on members of the AAPI community? Kind of an interactive presentation. Just feel free. Like, what are some of the expectations that are placed on Asian Pacific Islanders? To be respectful, hardworking, quiet, to do well in school, to follow the rules, to be the smartest and most respectful, to be good at math. And then the second question would be, so what are some of the struggles of students in the AAPI community in school and or in life, given these expectations? And then also in the chat, what are just some struggles with families' expectations? So not just society's expectations and the struggles, but also what are some of the struggles with families' expectations then as well? Again, in the chat. Feeling unable to meet expectations, right? Or not wanting to meet those expectations. Pressure to perform, conflict with parents, increased stress and anxiety. Absolutely. And they struggle with being disciplined, struggle with being respectful, and a lot of conflicts with immigrant parents as well. Struggle with feeling any agency over your life. Absolutely. So the model minority is a stereotype. It's something that's widely held but oversimplified. Really, a stereotype overgeneralizes an entire group. And really, then the model minority stereotype is actually used to continue to uphold supremacy. So for example, if this group, this minority group is doing it, if this group is achieving, then why can't you do it? You know, why can't you be successful just like they can? If they're doing it, why can't you do it? And so could there be such a thing as a positive or good stereotype? Because some of the statements that were made were like hardworking, good at math. Is there such a thing as a positive or good stereotype? If you could put that in the chat. And especially when you think about a stereotype overgeneralizing, like all Asians are this way. Is there a space for something like a good stereotype or a positive stereotype? Probably not. I don't believe so. I don't think so. Some of the chat.
Nancy?
So, go ahead.
Are we allowed, do you want us just to interact through chat, or are we allowed to answer orally?
Oh, no, definitely.
Yes.
Definitely.
Interactive.
I always think of like being smart, being perfect, like those are all good words when you take them out of like context, right? Like just that. But I always think of my daughter who struggled in school. And so she was not in AP classes. She was not part of all those kinds. And she struggled a lot because it was expected of her. And then it also didn't help that her mom was Valerie Ruiz. And right. And so like there was this big expectation on her. And so even though those words are great, when you don't fall into that generalization, I think it's hurtful and it hurts those people.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Is there anybody else that would like to share? Just about society's expectations and or then struggles that may ensue, or families' expectations and or struggles.
On a similar note, where if someone sets higher expectations of you and they are like, okay, let me give this kid the scaffolding, opportunities to build up to it. If they believe that you are capable of it, then they're going to be more willing to put in the time, right? If a kid is labeled gate, then they're like, oh yeah, we can go and do these things, as opposed to if a kid is labeled EL, then there's a bias that may be placed on to the student. And when the model minority myth of AAPI students are inherently smart and good at math and science, then they may be geared more towards those academics to do well in those things. And so someone might invest more opportunity and time into them. So it can be a positive, but like what Valerie was saying, that if that's not in their wheelhouse, it can be very stressful not to meet those expectations. And then culturally they feel like, oh man, I'm disappointing somebody who believes in me, and then that's another added stress.
Right. Thank you, Claire. Hi, Claire. Thank you.
Yeah, so there is a space where maybe the stereotype could be positive, right? Where it could encourage certain students to actually pursue something in math or science or whatnot. But then at the same time, if you don't fit into that model minority, then you may consider yourself a failure, and or may have more anxiety and or depression because you're not able to achieve that model. So definitely there could be some space for positivity, but at the same time, it's definitely harmful spaces as well. Any other comments?
Carlos asked about what about the other subjects? Do you mean like
so
courses?
You mean just like academically doing well and just like doing well, being successful academically in all subjects? Is that what you're thinking, Carlos?
In my experience, I've always had math as the one that comes up because that was a stereotype. And when I would say like, that's something hurtful, I would always hear, well, that's a good thing to have, right? To be good at math. And it was almost like, you shouldn't be offended by that because that's a good thing to say about somebody. So Carlos is saying outside of science and math. I haven't had that.
I want to chime in on that real brief, interject 20 seconds.
Go for it, Ron.
Math and science. I play on a travel basketball team. They're all business business owners. It's different from the school. Totally different. They're making money. Their money's making money. That's what they do, customer service. They're good at math and science. Math, mental math, science, chemistry majors, scientists. They make money on both sides of the border because of that. So, when somebody says you're great at math and science, well, that's a good match for you young people, Carlos, for you high school people in the future. You're going to be in school, if you're in high school, college, with all these people and, math and science. But obviously the other core academics are important. Reading and writing, PE, all that stuff, because it is incorporated. All of those degrees you earn are going to take you places. You're learning, you're applying those concepts, and you're marketable when you get rift. That's the reality. You build your network. You're not burning bridges. You're building them. Thank you, Carlos.
So as far as the model minority myth, specifically, it characterizes Asian Americans as being polite, law-abiding, who typically achieve a higher level of success and, pull themselves up by the bootstraps. So they just work hard, gritty. And I think the other thing too is just what was also in the chat is like, we're quiet, we don't complain. We're kind of like the worker bees. We work hard and we don't, cause any waves, so to speak. So when there is a model minority, then there's also the flip side, or a quote unquote bad minority. And what unfortunately has occurred is that then Asians are kind of used as a tool to further anti-Blackness. And so it's kind of like what we were saying before, which is, if they're able to do it, if they're able to achieve, why aren't you able to do it? And that's why it's really important, especially in these times, that community members within the AAPI community, that we really stand in solidarity with just communities of color, especially to basically say, we've been coined as the model minority, but many of us within the AAPI community are suffering. So for example, Asian American women, I think it's the age group of 18 to 24, have the second highest rates of suicide. So if we're this model minority and everything's so great, with all this pressure being placed upon us to always be academically successful, to work hard, to not say anything, to be quiet, if we're always trying to exemplify that model minority, really, we're not thinking about how many of us in the community are suffering as a result of these pressures and expectations that are being placed upon us. So you want to go ahead, Ron?
Yes, hi everybody. Are you able to hear me? I like that. So we talked about this yesterday, Nancy. It's a reality. It's an issue that we are very invested in, and that's why we're involved with this committee. On this committee, we have a lot of, strong leadership, female leadership. I'm like the only guy that joined in because I feel like I'm not giving enough back to the Philam community. Phila made a launch for my career, and that's why I'm on all these threads through Sal, Floor, all these Philam community threads. So I'm involved, but this gets our attention. As a counselor in the district, our job is safety first, child welfare. And this gets our attention just because they're 18, they may be a senior, they're in college, community college, whatever, working a job, military. 18 to 24 Asians, all that pressure, all that suffering, it's real. So real talk, we're here, we have credentials, we have licenses, we know what our limits are. We have a huge network to help people. And like they say now, I have it memorized, 741-741, text talk 24/7, 741-741. When all else fails, if it's dark outside, we're not in our office, call 911. It's an emergency, right? Speak to somebody. There's trained professionals that will help you. Ask them a simple question, let them know your pain, and they will help you. We're here to help you. So we're going to stay after if there's anybody who wants to talk to us. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, Ron, can you see the next question by chance or no? I can read it if you can. So basically is, if stereotypes or oversimplified generalizations, what impact might they have on groups of people who are stereotyped? So basically, what's the impact of stereotypes on groups of people? If you want to put that in the chat, are you able to see that, Ron?
No, I have a headache. I'm not able to do that right now. So basically stereotypes. So really the reality is I think we all are a part of being stereotyped growing up. I mean, like I wrote my dissertation on you learn what you live. You grow up with all that stuff. You see it, you're exposed to it. We're different cultures. It's different for everybody. I'm pretty sure we've all been stereotyped. I'm pretty sure we stereotype others. We're human. So what do? We're trying to move the needle in the right direction, right? So anyways, Valerie has a question. Go ahead, Val.
Sorry, I pressed the button. But I wanted to point out something that Ken had mentioned in the chat about that's a response to the question on the slide. He mentioned that there are also physical stereotypes and that people in the AAPI community aren't always thought of as athletic. And so I think the impact of that is this expectation that, like, well, you're Asian, you're not going to be good enough to play this game or be on this team. So I can see how maybe some of our students wouldn't be picked for certain teams based on that, or face some issues like later on when they're going into team sports.
Right. And also too,
Right.
like with the other stereotype of Asians kind of being meek, you know, not saying anything, not, is that they have lack of leadership skills. And so that's why, even though they're this model minority, then of course that glass ceiling is always like placed upon us of very few being in positions of power and leadership as well. But I really like what Claire said is, I mean, stereotypes basically remove the individuality. And then
Right.
and the next.
Okay. Wait.
You want me to? I can read
no.
the next question. Are
Nancy,
you able to see it?
Can I chime in on this one, please? Interject. So
of course.
Nancy and Valerie, you had great points. Physical therapy, physical stereotypes. I mean, it's real. You know, like that's why I think they created that human performance and well-being in 7th grade. You know, it incorporates health. You don't have to be the best athlete. You're basically there to get exercise outdoors, learn about nutrition, exercise, stretching, yoga, everything, steps. So you're getting exercise, so then it's a great break from your 5 academic classes, right? And then you apply these skills so that your nutrition, your health, your active lifestyle in the future, you just keep applying it, baby steps, you keep growing those skills. The second thing, Valerie, that's wonderful, what you said, but also Nancy, the leadership. That's why I think all of my retired mentors enjoying their retirement, they've been counselors many years. They were Pan-Asian advisors for many years. I did it for seven years at Bonita Middle. I know Laura Bomatai did it at Granger Junior. We had so many events, so many, and it was leadership. Learn about your culture, and basically so much more. Working together, teamwork, but really learning about your culture, leadership, giving back, which is community service. We did it all, right? So go ahead, Laura.
The next question.
Oh,
go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I wanted to say how sometimes stereotypes can also perpetuate kind of what Ron was saying, the genders, right? So for girls, it might be that there's this need to be petite, you know, to be skinny, to be beautiful, you know, that the lighter skin you are, the more prized you are, the more talent you have in singing or music, the more desirable you become. And then, you know, when talking about the males, like you were saying, not athletic, but smart, but more of like on the nerdy side, if I can use that word. So I do think that there's also, you know, an impact gender-wise.
Those are good points. Impact of gender bias. Thank you. And equity. Equity is a big thing also. Having the same number of boys and girls in a class, making sure technology, wood shop, all those things are available for girls as well, and making sure they're comfortable and not being bullied when they join those classes for whatever reasons. Okay, Nancy, what's the next slide, please?
How might the model minority myth be an obstacle for advancement for Asian Americans?
So one more
why
time.
Why is the false model minority statement? How is that an obstacle for advancement for Asian Americans?
Well, I think you touched upon it earlier, Nancy, that I think a lot of times people see Asians as quiet and maybe not a good leader, right? So maybe not someone who's going to be able to lead a team and speak for them and be able to do all these great things because they are introverted or they're quiet or all those different things. So for me as a leader, those are things I think about.
Ken has a statement in the
Wait, who was
chat.
that speaking, that last statement, before we move on to Ken? Who was that speaking, that last one? I couldn't find you.
It's me, Val.
Oh, Valerie, thank you. Okay, so
You're
Ken, go ahead.
I'll read it, Nancy.
Okay, go ahead.
Ken wrote, if it is better that we are treated outside of stereotypes and treated as an individual, why is there a box defining our ethnicity in school applications? That data pulled from the information, is it good or bad?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I do think, unfortunately, well, I think the brain naturally kind of categorizes and groups things, right? And so what's important is, I mean, I think of biracial kids, right? When they have to put a checkbox and they don't necessarily identify with just one box, so to speak. Unfortunately, it is true, like we tend to kind of group people or group things or generalize or overgeneralize. And so that data pulled from the information, is it good or bad? So is it good or bad to group people into like one like grouping, so to speak?
Ken, is it possible to talk more about that? I'd like to hear more.
Yes, Laura, we will. Let's go.
Ken, are you there? I don't know if you're able to be.
I'm here.
Okay. I just wanted to know if you can explain that a little bit more.
Well, I mean, you're asking this meeting is to try to avoid stereotypes, but stereotypes are already being created by putting us into categories that are on these applications. So what does the district actually look at when they're looking at these applications? Why is that data there? And if they're extrapolating data from that that's important, then how are we as groups being viewed at in that sense? Because now we are your data that you come out of that might say all Asians are good at this, and so now you're just feeding into your stereotype. So I'm not saying that it's good or bad. I'm just saying what kind of data and how important is it when you have these kind of questions on these applications. I know they affect for our college applications. I mean, these ethnicities will affect at some universities that they affect how applicants are chosen or how applicants are treated. But so at our middle school and high school levels, what significance does this have? And does the district treat students different based upon those boxes that are checked?
Those are great questions, Ken. So go ahead. The floor is open, everybody.
I think, speaking for myself, a lot of information can be taken from the data. And I know one thing that our district has been focused on is, are we making our curriculum accessible to all? And so when we look at our honors classes, our accelerated classes, our AP classes, and we see the students that are in there, it's very telling that we're not providing perhaps the access to all. So that's one way I feel that the data helps us analyze our system. That's just one example.
Yes, thank you, Laura. That makes sense. Any questions on that before somebody else chimes in?
So the only thing I wanted to just add is, I'm just making sure you're just aware that your brain does kind of group or generalize or sometimes overgeneralize. But often what I talk about is, just because I'm Korean and I grew up in California, I'm still very different from a Korean who grew up in New York. And even within just its culture, you not just think about ethnicity, but culture also encompasses not just ethnicity, but it also encompasses immigration status. When did you come to the United States? Are you first generation, second generation? Also encompasses religious beliefs, political beliefs, your identities as well, like gender identity, sexual identity. And so you're absolutely right that, just checking a little box, and then then those boxes kind of grouping. And I think the most important thing is just being aware how individual everybody is, even if they're within the same ethnic community.
Can I just chime in with that, Nancy and Ron? This is Dina. I'm a counselor.
Hi, Dina.
I think, Ken, I totally get what you're saying. How I think for me, it all boils down to money and politics. There is no other way that people are able to see where they're going to put their funding if they don't know what that community looks like, what that socioeconomic community looks like, what are, you know, and so it does feed on the stereotype, and it does it is detrimental if what that funding is going towards does not look at the totality of what that label is. So we've got Asian American folks who are not those straight A students. We've got Asian American folks who need a little bit more. I mean, I think about our EL students who are not being provided with services because the stereotype is that, oh, well, they'll learn how to speak English anyway, with or without the assistance of an EL class, because they're hardworking people. And so those services don't go towards our EL Asian American students. One, because there's not a lot. That's what I've been told. There's not a lot of students in the district to warrant having bilingual programs for them. So is there equity? No, there's no equity. It is a very inequitable system when you're looking at just the label rather than the impact of what's happening with groups of students at the schools, good or bad.
But grouping students as just an ethnicity isn't going to necessarily determine how a student may be. There are other questions that could be asked. I mean, you know, if they're a single parent home, if their parents, if they're being, if they have a guardianship, or other factors, or socioeconomic levels and stuff like that. And I'm sure that you're tracking the socioeconomic levels because you have the free and available lunches, or those kinds of things. So you have that level, but you also how your household is I think is a really good determination of how your student will do, or how much attention your student does get. But those questions, a lot of those statistics aren't asked, or those questions aren't asked. I mean, if it's a broken home, I've heard statistics say that, you know, the kids have a much more challenging time. So grouping in those kinds of areas, rather than just checking a box saying that you're Asian, wouldn't that be more effective, or a more effective way of reaching out to finding where instead of categorizing them as ethnicities, you're categorizing them as, well, you know, maybe these statistical kids need a little bit more attention.
Okay, everybody, I apologize for that. So where are we at?
Well, I think, you know, a form is like this quick way of possibly gathering information. And I think then that's where the educational system comes in with the various other supports. But definitely, I do agree that just categorizing people into check boxes and or different socioeconomic layers or levels isn't like the totality of the student and or what his or her needs may be.
Okay.
Next question, describe how the model minority myth might be used to drive a wedge between Asian Americans and other communities of color. So how does the model minority myth drive a wedge between the AAPI community and other communities of color? You can either put it in the chat or...
Hi, I'd like to, it's Gina Malari from
Hi, Gina.
National
Thank you, Gina.
City Middle. Hi.
Hi, Gina, go.
So what I believe is that it does, because of what we were talking about a little bit earlier, and as Ms. Donato had mentioned, is that we could have different types of, I'll just say Filipino community, or a student who may have arrived from the Philippines, and then because we don't have, and speaks very little English, and then because we don't have the services to help them, we put them in with the Spanish speaking students. So now they're not only a little bit lost with not speaking English, but now they're learning another language indirectly. So I think that, when that drives a wedge between the communities in the school setting. Part of it is where we're not able to support them and their needs. So that's one other thing. And then, again, back to the community overall in general. Well, why are they making it and they're working harder and their kids are getting good grades? It's just that whole seeing not the individuals, because I have worked with students who have arrived from the Philippines who aren't the most model minorities. And so, that's the part of it where the overgeneralization of that all of Asian students are always going to do well and they'll make it no matter what. And we'll just throw them in this classroom with all these other kids. And then it creates just other issues for the students in that class. Either they continue to stay quiet, remain quiet, or they get into trouble because they're bored or they don't understand. And then so they start to act out. So
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback on what you said, Ms. Malari. It really does. The Asian Americans, Asian Pacific Islanders, because of those stereotypes, were used as buffers. Were used as
Pawns.
Yeah, pawns. Absolutely, absolutely. You are so right, Nancy. We're used as pawns, and as the buffer between different communities of color. The sad thing is that when we start to believe it, and when we start to believe it, then the behaviors of Asian Americans towards other communities of color, I'm gonna say it. I'm just gonna put it out there. Is very racist. So we believe our own stuff and don't realize that we're perpetuating that same type of hatred towards other people, but it's us. And then I'd just like to pose this as a question. In terms of what we're now calling anti-Asian hate, for me, the reality is it's Asian racism. Why is it that it's the label is softened like that when the reality is that the behavior towards Asian Americans right now is racism? But yet society don't want to look at it as that because they don't want to lose that pawn in that. They don't want to lose that. Yeah, absolutely. That pawn in creating that division between communities.
Absolutely. I like what Leanna put in the chat is it definitely pits people of color against each other and divides our communities when it'd be more productive to stand with each other in solidarity. So what we're really asking for, it's actually a really good segue, is the model minority mutiny, and really challenging Asian Americans to stand up and speak out and take action, not just everything going on with the anti-Black movement, but also just like anti-racism, and really just advocate in a way that we haven't really organized and or advocated for before. So the next question will be, how can Asian Americans stand in solidarity to fight for justice, and what does that mean? What does it mean to be an ally, and what does being an ally look like to you? To stand in solidarity and be an ally. I recently learned the term co-conspirator, which is a different level, but maybe some of you can share just how you can stand in solidarity and or be an ally, what you're comfortable with.
I think so first, how we could stand in solidarity, how we could be ally, like these kind of conversations that we're having every Friday, I think is a great start. I also think using our voice. I recently finished, this book is Anti-Racist, and they talk, and it's a book written for students on how to be anti-racist in school. And one of the things she talks about is using your superpower, like that's the way she phrased it. And sometimes our superpower is our voice, because our ally isn't able to use their voice. And so, you know, speaking up for those who aren't listened to is one way of being an ally. Going to rallies with our allies and showing up at a BLM rally, right, as Asians, being an ally that way, or, you know, so those are two ways I think about how we could be allies to one of each other.
Thank you for sharing. Anyone else?
Well, let me chime in. It's been a while, right? Nancy? I forgot I was even in this meeting. So anyways, what I heard a few people say, let me just segue into, how many slides do we have left? Nancy, please. Nancy, how many slides do we have left? Are we almost done with the slides?
We're at 15 right now.
Okay, so there's 21 slides, so let's keep going. But what's the next slide then? We'll just keep going.
Was there anybody else that wants to share just about being an ally or what that looks like? One of the things that I read about that was kind of interesting is, you know, I always knew about, you know, just getting more information, which is reading books or gaining knowledge, having a cultural mentor, somebody that you can ask questions to and get feedback from. And one of the things I recently read, which I thought was interesting, is not necessarily always asking that person of color for information, and trying to get as much knowledge yourself, but not always asking for questions, you know, from that person. I remember when I first came to San Diego, somebody asked me, what's the difference between being what's the difference between Taiwan and Thailand? And I was like, I remember being so offended, just going like, you know, just because I'm Asian, I do know the answer, but I just kind of was taken aback. But yeah, I mean, it's good to have a cultural mentor. I think that's important. It's also more important just reading, gaining knowledge for yourself as well, and definitely speaking up as long as you feel comfortable. So communities of color, we're all interconnected, and we all should be fighting against racism because of that interconnectedness. And sometimes it's difficult because we may have families and our friends who make racist comments. And so the most important thing, I think, is that that you feel safe and confident in actually having communication, and or when you witness some racist comments and or a racist situation. And really being an ally is not just showing up, but also learning. And some people think being an ally is actually a really big, bold move. And so here are just some of the key things to do if you're ever in a situation. You can obviously remain calm. You can ask the person, you know, why they may have that particular point of view. You can offer an alternative perspective. You can definitely also show empathy for the person who's experiencing racism right then and there. Now, if you're in a very confrontational situation, you can obviously record as many people have been doing. You can take notes. You can report it to the police. We want to make sure that you feel safe and comfortable and confident. But definitely, at the very least, if you can just ask the person why they have that particular viewpoint and maybe offer them an alternative perspective.
Nancy, we have a few people with their hand raised. So Jennifer, if you're still there, you had your hand raised.
Hi, I'm here. I was just thinking, you know, when the quarantine happened and there was so much information and books starting to come out where we could read, I think reading was really important. And then as a teacher, sometimes you get oversaturated. And so listening to this discussion has really helped me with perspective. And I think that part coupled with the learning, oftentimes with the system that we're in, sometimes the racism is so ingrained, you don't realize it. So what do I look for? What am I listening for? And I love what you just said. Can you tell me more about that? Why do you think that? Because sometimes we're taught in this profession not to be confrontational, for lack of a better word, just kind of go with the flow. And I think knowing what to look for, understanding what's happening around you is what I'm trying to say. Sometimes it's inundated. We have so much information from the books, but we never processed it. So it kind of just sits there. So as an ally, I work to listen to others and then try to listen to the people around me and see if I hear things. Also challenging our curriculum. We don't have to have, my children are biracial, they're African American and Black, and they don't need to read stories all the time about slavery and hardships in Black communities. And our kids don't need to have, this is the story about, you know, the Asian life. Just be a story with Asian characters or a story with Black characters. So I think we need to challenge the text we read and challenge others in that way too.
Thank you, Jennifer. Ken, do you still
thank you, Jennifer.
Do you still have your hand raised?
Yes, I do. On allying with people of color, I'm just kind of curious because some of the racism that happens over at my daughter's school isn't from non-people of color. So, for lack of a better word, shouldn't we just be looking for people that will help us through these? It doesn't matter what color they are. Isn't it important, to have everybody help each other, not just one ethnic group and another? I mean,
Yes, I'll chime in right there, Ken. So 6:25, I think this ends at 6:30. So when we end at 6:30, Nancy, myself, and I imagine a few of the committee members are going to volunteer to stay after. So Ken, that's great. That's what I'm thinking the whole time. It's not color. I mean, I went to a school, Montgomery High School, Montgomery Junior, Wars Lincoln, Chula Vista School District, but it's in the South Bay border town. I didn't know anything like that growing up. We are in a melting pot in a way, and it's cultural diversity, multicultural education. Perhaps that's why I continued in the CBB, community-based block masters in counseling, because yes, we try our best not to see color and everybody help each other. I mean, that's being a great human being doing the right thing. So earlier, like I heard internalizing stuff. We do it all the time. It's so easy to internalize stuff. Then we start questioning our judgment, our decision making. We're hesitant. We're lost and confused. But no, that's why I think we're having these forums, so that we have strength in numbers, and we could say to ourselves, when people come at us, we could say to them, yeah, like when I started working in this community a long time ago, I was the youngest counselor. I went to Point Loma Nazarene, and I was supposed to work at Pacific Beach. I had a conflict. I was a counselor in a drug rehab in El Cajon, and there were all these Orange County white Caucasian families. And I was assigned Sunset View right next door, affluent community. And it prepared me when I was hired at Bonita Vista Middle, affluent community back then. I had a Martin Luther King poster on my wall in my office, because that's one of my most influential people way back in 19, whatever it was, 90 when I was hired, 89, 90. And my mom, most influential person, a little petite Filipino American, strong voice, like all of you women, leaders, strong. So long story short, I was getting hate mail. Back then, there was nothing like emails or whatever. I was getting literally hate mail for that poster. And I brought it to my 3 retired counselors. One was a German female, another white male whose wife was a white counselor in the district, and then another Latina. They all retired. Long story short, they're like, that's BS. They should come up to you, talk to you in person, write their name and phone number, whatever, have a conversation so it's not one-sided. Attacking me that I had a Martin Luther King poster with a sentence below, and that was my inspiration.
Can I respond to Ken, please?
Yes, definitely.
Ken, racism is not, yes, racism is not a monopoly that only white people have. Racist behaviors can be seen in any community that is dominant and that that uses its power to put other communities down. Okay. However, and so when we say be an ally with communities of color, well, the reality is that communities of color don't have that political and economic power in this country. And communities of color don't determine what kind of curriculum should be taught to kids. But so that, I think for me, that's what that sentence meant by allying yourself with communities of color. But I think in the bottom line, just as a human being, we need to ally ourselves with anyone who's being oppressed. And so yeah, we're going to experience racism or racist behaviors in communities that may not be predominantly white, that could be predominantly brown, black, what have you. And it's the behavior that's what's most hurtful. But if we were to look at what really runs the direction that this country has, that and you know, I'm not saying anything bad about the United States. It's just that my parents came here because they believed in the dream and the potential that their kids can have in this country, and I believe it too. That's why I didn't go back to the Philippines. Okay, but the reality is that we're not on equal footing by any means at all, regardless of how rich you become in an economic standing. That stereotype of who you are based on your looks, based on your appearance, is always going to be there until things change. And that I think for me, that's what I take from that statement of allying yourself with communities of color.
Thank you, Dina. Thank you, Dina.
I just wanted to share, I took a sociology class in college, and it was a Black professor, and he said, you know, by me teaching you, you're going to get a very different perspective than if it was a different sociology professor. And he went through every institution in the United States. And he said, the higher you go up, whether in education, politics, sports, media, the higher you go up, you're going to see less people of color and less women. And you're absolutely right, Dina, that's who has power. Now, the challenge would be if you do have power, if you are in a position of power, then you actually do have a greater voice. And so the more power you have, the voice that you have actually can be more powerful, and to really, you have the ability to have greater advocacy because of that. So I think there's always going to be majorities and minorities, but just know if you are part of the majority, you have the power, and you can actually be a greater advocate and or ally. So that's another challenge to all of you who are part of the majority in whatever situation.
Yes, thank you, Nancy. Okay, let me interject. So 6:31, I'm going to wrap this up. I think we covered the slides. If we didn't, we'll stay back. Again,
I think, Ranello, no disrespect, but I think if other folks want to chime in on and want to stay and take a look at it,
Yeah.
maybe we shouldn't wrap it up right now.
Right.
Just
Okay.
out of respect for other folks.
Yeah, we could do that, Dina. I was going to say one thing though. So I hear what you're saying, Nancy, and Dina. Yes, we'll stay on. So then, the less people of color and women position of power, the higher education, the higher you get in your whatever corporation, military, whatever. So I hear what you're saying. The ability for greater advocacy, the majority. But the reality is this: we have a voice. This strength in numbers, we do have a voice. We're not following all of these stereotypes. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons we became an educator, a counselor, administrator. Your parents, the values we learned, and we try to teach those lessons to our kids. I remember my dad, I had to do a lesson for the Navy. My dad, December 7, 1941, he joined the Navy at 17. He had to tolerate a lot of abuse, a lot, to get here. Just like most of the dads, Filipino dads, let's say, to get the wave over here. Because otherwise, you're not going to be able to go to the U.S. and have those opportunities, education, prosperity, happiness, whatever. So they tolerated a lot of abuse. And the last thing is, well, no, let's just stay with this program. So yes, Dina, go ahead, everybody.
So I wanted to, this is Claire. I wanted to say how earlier, I think it was Ken was talking about supporting one another, that it isn't just about, allying and so on. When we talk about people of power, in the classroom, it's such a powerful place to be because the kids are able to get exposed to so many different ideas, not just in high school, but it also, like, as Nancy mentioned, in college. And so one of the things that I like to do is teach the students about my last name, and where even my last name right now, SAT, is my married name, but then my former name,
Perez.
Mother, yes, Perez, and then my mother's maiden name, and how there is a tie. And then, like being able to say like, hey, there's like, we have so much more in common. And, when we talk about the different, X whatever representation month, and saying it's not about just that group this month. It's about how does this and the progress that these groups have made, how has it benefited you, right? And the kids should be able to say like, hey, doesn't matter what my background is, I have benefited from people standing up. I have benefited for people challenging the norm. And when they see how much more they get, as a benefit of people standing up, then they start realizing together that we are stronger together. And so by bringing up simple things about,
Yes.
heritage and how we are more blessed by the efforts of others, it doesn't matter what they look like. If we can unify around that, the kids, will continue to build their voice. And who knows what our current students are going to stand up for in 2 years, 10 years, 20 years. And so that's my thing. But I definitely agree with uniting, not just like, it's not just Asians are promoting Stop Hate. It's against AAPI. It's about all kinds of racism.
Yeah, you're right. I want to say thank you, Claire. I want to say
Jennifer
one more
has her
thing
hand
before I
up
forget. But go
real
ahead.
quick.
Others,
Oh.
go ahead.
Okay, Jennifer, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
Or Laura too. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I have 3 boys, so I have to tell them to shush. I'll be
Thank you, Jennifer.
So some of the things that we've been talking about is what I hear. Representation is so important, but so is that connection. When my kids have a teacher who is Mexican and she shares about herself and they learn about her and they learn about who she is, then they understand more when they see things and they can make those connections. We need to have the representation. My kids need a Black teacher. They need an Asian teacher. We need to have so much more than just, the people we see in the streets, but the connection where they kind of live together and get to know each other, because that's where their hearts and their eyes kind of understand more so than just the books understanding.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Laura, did you want to say something?
I am just really, really impressed. It's made an impression on me, I should say, all the comments and the people who joined us tonight. Yes, just like Claire said, these are very, very important conversations. We do have other topics coming up. We hope if you learned something, if you're taking away something from these conversations tonight, I hope you come back and I hope you share and bring more people with you. So I just want to say thank you for joining us tonight.
Yes, thank you, Laura.
And here are the next presentations: April 30th, Roots of Race; May 7th, Race and Migration; and May 14th, Connecting with Other Races. So that's it for today. Thank you all for sharing. We'll stay, I'm sure the community members and will stay behind if you do have any questions. So thank you all, and we hope to see you next week.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, committee. Thank you to all those that joined us. We'll stay after. Be safe and healthy. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, presenters. It was a great presentation and great information.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Catherine.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, you guys. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for participating, and thanks for presenting. These are tough topics to talk about. It really